Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories. Step into a world where love is dangerous, passion is addictive, and obsession knows no limits. From ruthless millionaire CEOs to forced marriages, dark secrets, and heart-stopping romance, every story will leave you craving more. If you love suspenseful, emotional, and intense love stories, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now and become part of the obsession. Turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Let the journey begin. The wedding hall was breathtaking, decorated with towering floral arrangements and glistening chandeliers. Every seat was filled with dignitaries, businessmen, and women adorned in expensive silk and diamonds. Yet despite the lavish setting, Ella Carter felt like a prisoner being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bouquet of ivory roses. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but there was nothing happy about it. She glanced toward the man standing at the altar, waiting for her. Leon Blackwood. He was the kind of man who made people uneasy without even speaking a word. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly handsome, he carried himself like a king surveying his kingdom. His sharp, chiseled features were carved from stone, and his cold gray eyes were unreadable. Leon Blackwood was the kind of man who never smiled unless it was for a business deal. And today, she was the deal. A marriage without love, Ella's stepmother, Vivian Carter, sat in the front row, her lips curling into a victorious smirk. It was Vivian who had orchestrated this nightmare, sealing Ella's fate to a man who barely acknowledged her presence. "Walk," Vivian whispered under her breath, her voice sharp as a dagger. Ella inhaló con dificultad y dio un paso adelante. Each step felt like she was walking toward a life sentence. When she reached Leon, she looked up at him, hoping, praying to see a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. But there was nothing. No tenderness, no kindness, just indifference. The vows that meant nothing. "Do you, Leon Blackwood, take Ella Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Leon's jaw tightened. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he wanted to say no, but instead, his voice came out firm and emotionless. "I do." Ella flinched at how hollow the words sounded. The priest turned to her. "Do you, Ella Carter, take Leon Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She wanted to scream, to run, to beg for someone to stop this. But Vivian's eyes burned into her from across the aisle, a silent warning. If Ella dared to humiliate her stepmother, she would suffer the consequences. So swallowing the lump in her throat, Ella whispered, "I do." With that, the priest announced them husband and wife. Leon leaned in slightly. Ella's heart pounded. Was he about to kiss her? But at the last second, he turned away, murmuring, "Let's get this over with." Not even a kiss. Not even a smile. Nothing. A husband who feels nothing. The reception was filled with polite conversations and clinking champagne glasses, but Leon and Ella barely spoke. He shook hands with business partners, exchanged nods with investors, and played the role of a perfect groom for everyone but her. Ella watched as he laughed at someone's joke, his cold mask slipping just enough to reveal a more charming side. But the moment he glanced at her, the warmth vanished. He didn't want this marriage. He didn't want her. The wedding night. That wasn't when they arrived at Leon's penthouse. Ella expected some kind of acknowledgement, maybe even a discussion about what this marriage meant for them. But instead, he walked straight past her, shrugging off his suit jacket. "Leon," she tried, her voice hesitant. He paused, but he didn't turn around. "This marriage is nothing but a contract," he said, his voice cold. "You were forced into it, and so was I. So don't expect anything from me." Ella's fingers curled into fists. "I never asked for this either." "Good," Leon muttered. "Then let's get one thing straight. I will never love you." Her breath hitched. He turned to face her, his gray eyes sharp and unwavering. "You are my wife on paper, but that's all you'll ever be. Don't expect affection. Don't expect kindness." The words stung more than they should have. Leon took a step closer, his towering presence making her heart pound. "Obey me, and you'll live a comfortable life. Defy me, and I will make things very difficult for you. Do you understand?" Ella's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. "I understand." Leon studied her for a moment, something flickering in his gaze, something unreadable. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Without another word, he walked away, leaving her alone on their wedding night. A cold marriage, but a lingering fire. Ella sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her husband, a man who had just vowed to never love her, was somewhere in the penthouse, as distant as ever. But what neither of them realized was that it had already begun. Leon had meant to keep his distance, to feel nothing. Yet as he lay in bed that night, something about her unsettled him. Something about Ella Carter refused to leave his mind. And though he had vowed to never love her, he had no idea that she was already becoming his obsession. The silence between them had become suffocating. For a week, Leon Blackwood had barely spoken to her. After their cold, emotionless wedding night, Ella found herself alone in a golden cage. A wife in name only, ignored by a man who treated her as nothing more than an inconvenience. She should have been relieved, should have been grateful that he kept his distance. But she wasn't, because no matter how much Leon pretended she didn't exist, his presence was everywhere. She felt him in the way the air tensed when he entered a room. She noticed how his sharp eyes flickered toward her whenever he thought she wasn't looking. He was distant, yet there, detached, yet aware of her every move. And tonight, something was about to break. A war of words. Ella stood in the massive penthouse kitchen, staring at the untouched dinner she had asked the chef to prepare. Leon hadn't come home for dinner all week. It was a routine by now. But tonight, for some reason, she had hoped. And then, just as she was about to clear the plates, the front door swung open with force. Leon strode in, his broad shoulders tense, his suit jacket undone, as if he had pulled it off in frustration. His tie was loosened, the top buttons of his crisp shirt unfastened. Ella inmediatamente supo que algo estaba mal. "You're late," she muttered before she could stop herself. Leon's eyes flicked toward her, sharp as a blade. "Excuse me?" She swallowed, suddenly regretting speaking at all. I had dinner made," she said, her voice quieter. "But you never come home on time." A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "So now you expect me to be a devoted husband? After we both agreed this marriage is nothing?" Ella flinched at his words, but her pride flared. "I never expected anything from you, Leon, but I am still your wife, whether you like it or not." Leon took a slow step toward her, then another. For the first time, his cold mask cracked. "You think I don't know that?" he murmured darkly. She backed up instinctively, but he kept coming until the counter pressed against her spine. "You think I don't notice you?" he continued, his voice lowering. "Dangerous. Intense." Ella's breath caught. His scent surrounded her, a mix of expensive cologne and something darker. Something that made her stomach tighten in ways she didn't understand. His hands braced on the counter beside her, trapping her in place. Not touching her, yet. But the heat of him was suffocating. "You hate this marriage, don't you?" he whispered. Her heart pounded. "Yes," she whispered back. Something flickered in his gaze. Something dangerous. Then he kissed her. A night that changed everything. The kiss was nothing like she expected. It wasn't soft or careful. It wasn't the kiss of a man fulfilling a duty. It was raw, possessive, unforgiving, a battle, a surrender. Ella gasped against his mouth, but Leon didn't stop. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her flush against his body. The warmth of him burned through the thin silk of her nightgown, sending a shiver down her spine. She should have pushed him away. She should have fought, but she didn't. Her fingers curled into his shirt as if holding on for dear life. She felt his heartbeat, fast, unsteady, matching hers. Leon was losing control, and it terrified him. He kissed her harder, as if punishing her for making him feel this way. His fingers traced up her back, gripping her like he needed to memorize her, as if he had been starving for her and couldn't stop. Ella's mind screamed at her, but her body betrayed her. She wanted this, needed this. Then suddenly, he pulled away. His breathing was ragged, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. His hands still gripped her waist, but they trembled slightly. Ella's lips tingled from the bruising intensity of the kiss. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the kitchen was their uneven breaths. And then, Leon whispered something that made her entire body freeze. "What have you done to me?" The morning after, and the change. Ella barely slept that night. The heat of Leon's touch still lingered on her skin, her mind replaying every moment of that kiss, every desperate, broken moment. She had seen something different in his eyes last night, something that terrified her. And when she woke up the next morning, she knew she was right. Leon was different. He was waiting for her in the dining room. For the first time since their marriage, he had breakfast with her. She watched him warily as he sipped his coffee, his gaze lingering on her too long, his expression unreadable. Then as she reached for the butter knife, his hand shot out, stopping her wrist. She gasped. "What?" Leon's thumb traced over her skin, his grip firm, possessive. Ella looked up at him, her pulse racing. His gray eyes darkened. "You belong to me now, Ella." The words sent a shiver through her, not because they were romantic, but because for the first time she realized he meant them. Leon Blackwood had vowed to never love her, but now he was obsessed. Ella Carter had never been a prisoner. At least that's what she told herself. Growing up under her stepmother's cruel thumb, she had learned to adapt, to be quiet, to survive. But Leon Blackwood was different. He wasn't just cruel, he was obsessed. The rules begin. It started subtly. The morning after that night, Ella woke up to find an elegant black box on her dresser. Inside lay a silk dress, deep emerald, delicate yet modest, expensive beyond reason. Leon sat at the dining table, sipping coffee like a king waiting for his queen. "Put it on," he said, not looking up. Ella hesitated. "Why?" His silver gray eyes lifted, locking onto hers. "Because I want you to." A week ago she would have argued, but now something in his gaze unsettled her. She wore the dress. That was the first mistake, because the moment she obeyed, the cage began to close. Nowhere to hide. She soon realized Leon controlled everything. The chauffeur wouldn't take her anywhere unless Leon approved. The house staff reported her every move. Her phone, once her last connection to the outside world, suddenly had limited calls. And then there was him, watching, always watching. At first she dismissed it as paranoia, but then she noticed the way he seemed to know things before she told him. One night she left the penthouse to take a walk by the private gardens downstairs. Fresh air, a simple breath of freedom. But as she turned the corner, he was there, leaning against a black luxury car, arms crossed, eyes locked on her with an unreadable expression. Ella's breath hitched. "What are you doing here?" Leon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, but the hold on her was unbreakable. "You don't need to leave, Ella." His voice was low, dangerous. "Everything you need is already inside." Her chest tightened. "Everything you need. But what about what I want, trapped in his web?" It wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Leon didn't demand. He made her believe she had no choice. She wanted to meet an old friend for coffee. Suddenly, her schedule was full. She wanted to visit a bookstore. Books were delivered to her doorstep instead. She wanted space. Leon found ways to fill it. Every day his presence grew heavier. His touches lingered. His gaze darkened when another man so much as looked at her. He didn't say it outright, but she felt it in her bones. He was claiming her, and no one had ever claimed Ella Carter before. The breaking point one evening, she finally snapped. "Leon, stop," she said, yanking her wrist from his grasp when he reached for her at dinner. He blinked, his brows drawing together in slight surprise. No one ever denied him. "I need air," she said, pushing back her chair. "Alone." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You can go." She exhaled in relief until he added, "But not alone." "Ella si congelo. You don't trust me to take a damn walk?" Leon sighed, setting his wineglass down. "This world is dangerous." "Or maybe you just don't trust me," she bit out. Silence, a chilling silence. Then Leon stood, slowly, deliberately. He walked toward her, his presence suffocating. And when he reached her, he didn't touch her. But he didn't need to. His voice was ice when he spoke. "You are mine, Ella. There is no escape." A shiver ran down her spine. This was no ordinary marriage. This was possession. And for the first time she realized, Leon Blackwood would never let her go. The penthouse was silent, the kind of silence that stretched too deep, too long, pressing against the walls like a held breath. Ella stirred in her sleep, a strange sensation tugging her from the depths of slumber. The feeling of being watched. Her lashes fluttered, the darkness of the bedroom swallowing everything. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. And then she saw him. A tall figure stood at the edge of her bed, barely illuminated by the faint moonlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Unmoving. Unblinking. Watching. Ella's heart slammed against her ribs. Her breath caught. "Leon!" Her voice was hoarse, thick with sleep. He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't look away either. Her husband, the man who had vowed never to love her, was standing in the darkness, watching her sleep. A haunting gaze. Ella sat up slowly, the silk sheets pulling around her waist. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her throat tight. Leon tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. His gray eyes were darker than usual, heavy with something she couldn't understand. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. Her pulse quickened. "So you decided to stand over me like some kind of shadow?" His lips curved. Not quite a smirk, not quite a smile. Something else. "Does it scare you?" he asked, his voice impossibly soft. Ella Citrago. "Should it?" A slow exhale. He took a step closer. "No," he said. "It should intrigue you." She shivered. There was something wrong with this moment, something unspoken in his stare, like a predator watching his prey, not with cruelty, but with undeniable possession. Secrets in the dark. "How long?" she whispered. Leon's brow arched. "How long what?" She forced herself to hold his gaze. "How long have you been watching me?" A heartbeat of silence. Then a soft chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, stepping even closer. "You wouldn't understand." Her breath hitched. "Try me." Leon's eyes flickered with something almost fond, dangerously fond. He lifted a hand, brushing his fingers along her jaw. The touch was feather-light, but it burned. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not yet." Her pulse pounded as he leaned in, his lips ghosting over her temple before he pulled away, leaving her cold. And then he left the room, as if nothing had happened. A nightmare or a warning? Ella no durmió para el resto de la noche. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind spiraling. How long had he been watching her? Was this the first time? Or had there been other nights? She remembered the way he always knew things before she said them. How he always appeared before she even realized she needed him. Was it intuition? Or had Leon Blackwood been watching her far longer than she realized? And if he had, why? The obsession deepens. The next morning, Leon was normal. Too normal. He sat at the breakfast table, flipping through the business section of the newspaper, as if he hadn't been standing over her like a phantom at 3 a.m. Ella watched him carefully, studying every move, every glance. He felt it, because as he sipped his coffee, his lips curved. "Sleep well, sweetheart?" The coffee cup in her hands trembled slightly. Leon knew. He knew she was unraveling, and he liked it, because this wasn't the beginning of his obsession. It was the beginning of hers. The mansion was too quiet. Ella stood in Leon's private study, surrounded by dark mahogany shelves, in the scent of leather and expensive whiskey. She shouldn't have been here. Leon had rules, and one of them was simple. Stay out of my study. But tonight, the shadows whispered secrets. And Ella Carter was done pretending she didn't hear them. She had only meant to grab a pen from his desk. Just one small thing. But the drawer had been slightly open, and inside was something she was never meant to see. The file that changed everything. The file was thick, bound in black leather. Her name was printed on the label in crisp silver letters. Ella Carter. Her stomach clenched. Fingers trembling, she opened it, and her entire world shattered. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Some were from last year, some from 5 years ago, some from nearly a decade before they had even met. Ella walking home from school, Ella sitting alone in a coffee shop, Ella in a bookstore, fingers tracing the spines of novels. Ella at 18, laughing with a friend, completely unaware of the camera capturing her. The air in her lungs vanished. This wasn't just an arranged marriage. Leon Blackwood had been watching her for years. The confrontation, Ella didn't remember leaving the study, didn't remember moving through the dark, empty halls, but she remembered pushing open their bedroom door with trembling hands. Leon stood near the window, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hands tucked in his pockets. Completely calm. He didn't seem surprised to see her, but when he turned, his gray eyes flickered over her shaking frame, and something dangerous crossed his expression. "You went through my things." His voice was low, almost amused. Ella threw the file onto the bed between them. "What the hell is this?" Leon exhaled slowly, then walked toward the bed. He picked up the file with ease, flipping it open as if it were nothing more than a business report. Like this wasn't insanity. "You already know what it is," he said simply. Her breath shuddered. "How long?" A slow, knowing smirk curled at his lips. "How long have I wanted you?" Ella's stomach twisted. "How long have you been following me?" Leon let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Oh, sweetheart, it was never about following you." He took a step closer. Ella took a step back. "You were mine before you even knew my name," he murmured. The room tilted. "You," she swallowed. "That's not possible. We met last year. You met me last year," he corrected, stepping even closer. "But Ella's knees felt weak. "I didn't know you before then." Leon smiled, a slow, deliberate, terrifying smile. "You didn't have to," he whispered. Caught in his web, Ella wanted to scream, wanted to run. But where would she go? He had been controlling her from the beginning, long before she even realized. "You knew this marriage would happen?" she whispered, voice barely audible. Leon studied her carefully. "Yes. You made it happen." A pause. Then, "Yes." Ella's pulse thundered in her ears. "Why?" Leon's expression darkened. He reached out, fingers brushing along her wrist before she could pull away. "You wouldn't understand, sweetheart," he murmured. Her breath caught. Because he had said those exact words the night before, how many secrets had he been keeping? She tried to step back, but his grip tightened. Not painful, but firm, unbreakable. "You were always meant to be mine, Ella," Leon whispered. His voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was terrifyingly certain. And for the first time, she realized, there was no escape. Not from him. Not from this web he had so carefully woven around her. And worst of all, some part of her wasn't sure she wanted to escape. Ella Carter had never been more afraid. Not of Leon Blackwood, but of herself. Because no sane woman, no rational person, should feel this drawn to the man who had been stalking her for years. She needed to get out, before it was too late, before she lost herself completely. The plan for the next 2 days, Ella played her part perfectly. She smiled at breakfast, let Leon kiss her forehead before leaving for work, even let him wrap his arm around her waist at an event. But inside she was screaming. The file had changed everything. She couldn't pretend anymore. She had to leave. That night she locked herself in the bathroom, trembling fingers gripping her phone. She only had one person to call. The line rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Ella, is that you?" Her heart clenched. Daniel. Daniel Harper had been her closest friend once, before Vivian had forced her into this marriage. Before Leon. She hadn't spoken to him in a year. Not since Leon had erased every trace of her past. Ella's voice shook. "I need your help." A pause, then, "Where are you?" The final steps. They planned everything. Daniel would pick her up the next evening. She would slip out during one of Leon's late meetings. One chance. Ella spent the entire day on edge. Every time Leon looked at her, she wondered, does he know? But he didn't act any different. At dinner, he was calm. At night, he kissed her softly before heading to his office, promising he'd be working late. The second the door closed, she ran. Her heart pounded as she grabbed a coat, shoved a few essentials into a bag. The elevator ride down felt endless. The lobby too quiet. Then, freedom. The cold night air hit her as she stepped onto the street. Her pulse raced. Daniel's car turned the corner. Almost there. But then, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The back window rolled down. And there he was, Leon Blackwood, waiting, watching, smirking. Ella's blood turned to ice. She took a step back. He stepped out of the car. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" Caught Ella turned to run. Strong hands caught her within seconds, pulling her against a solid chest. She gasped, struggling, but Leon only laughed. "Shh," he murmured, lips brushing against her ear. "You know you can't escape me." She fought harder. "Let me go." But his grip only tightened. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" he whispered. Ella stilled. Leon sighed, almost disappointed. "Daniel, sweetheart?" Of all people? A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. "What did you do?" Leon chuckled, low and dark. "Let's just say he won't be coming." Ella's knees nearly gave out. "You—" "Shh." Leon hushed, pressing a slow kiss to her temple. "You're shaking. Let me take you home." "That's not my home," she choked out. He exhaled as if the words genuinely hurt him. Then before she could react, he lifted her into his arms. She thrashed, fists pounding against his chest. "Leon!" But he was already sliding into the car, pulling her onto his lap. His arms caged her in, unyielding, unbreakable. "You should have known better, Ella," he murmured against her hair. She trembled. "Run all you want," he whispered. "I will always find you." And as the car disappeared into the night, Ella realized she was never getting away. Ella sat in Leon's study, the weight of the past pressing down on her like an invisible force. The fire in the grand fireplace crackled softly, casting shadows across the room. Outside, the city twinkled in the distance. But inside, she was trapped. Trapped in a marriage she never wanted. Trapped in a man's obsession. Trapped in a web she never saw being spun around her. And now, she had just discovered the worst part. This had never been about love. It had always been about control. Unraveling the truth. Leon was gone for the night, called away for an emergency meeting. Ella knew she didn't have long. With her heart racing, she crept toward his desk. She had searched his study before, but something told her there was more. She rifled through drawers, scanning over old business reports, contracts, letters. Nothing. Then just as she was about to give up, she saw it. A small locked drawer on the left side of the desk. Her fingers trembled as she grabbed a letter opener and forced the lock. It clicked open. Inside was an old leather-bound folder. And when she opened it, her breath stopped. Her father's name. Bold. Official. Tied to Leon's family. Page after page. Document after document. Proof that her late father, Richard Carter, had been connected to the Blackwoods. The air in her lungs vanished. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't fate. This had been planned. From the start. A pawn in his game. The front door slammed. Ella jumped, shoving the documents back into the drawer. Too late. She turned just as Leon stepped into the room. He didn't look surprised to see her. He never did. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorframe, gray eyes dark and knowing. "Did you find what you were looking for?" His voice was smooth, laced with amusement. Ella's hands clenched into fists. "How long?" Leon arched a brow. "How long what, sweetheart? How long have you been planning this?" Her voice cracked, but she refused to look away. "How long have I been nothing but a pawn to you?" Leon exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. Then slowly he crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. "You were never a pawn," he murmured. "You were the only thing I ever wanted." Her breath hitched. "Liar," she whispered. Leon's fingers traced along her jaw. Slow. Possessive. "Your father owed mine a debt," he admitted. "A debt that only one thing could repay." Ella's heart pounded. "Me," she choked out. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "You." No escape. Ella tried to step back, but Leon caught her wrist, his grip gentle yet unyielding. "You were always meant to be mine, Ella," he whispered. "From the moment you were born." Her stomach twisted. This was insanity. "My father would never—" "He didn't have a choice," Leon murmured, brushing his lips over her knuckles. "Just like you don't." Tears burned in her eyes. "You stole my life." Leon's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Sweetheart," he murmured, cupping her face. "I didn't steal anything. I simply took what was already mine." Ella's breathing turned ragged. "You can't keep me here forever." Leon's lips curled, dark and devastatingly confident. "Watch me." She trembled. Because the worst part? She believed him. And deep down, somewhere she wasn't ready to admit, some part of her didn't want to run anymore. Ella Carter had spent weeks trying to escape Leon Blackwood. And now, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The realization hit her like a storm, unraveling every ounce of logic she had left. She should hate him. She should fear him. But every time he touched her, every time his lips brushed against her skin, she felt her resistance crumbling. And that terrified her more than anything. Because if she wasn't careful, she might never want to leave. A dangerous pull. Leon was working late again, or at least that's what he wanted her to believe. Ella lay awake in their massive bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. She couldn't sleep, not when his words still echoed in her head. "You were always meant to be mine." The possessiveness should have disgusted her, should have sent her running. Instead, it made her shiver. She squeezed her eyes shut. Number. She wouldn't let herself fall for this, for him. She pushed back the covers, slipping out of bed. The mansion was silent as she made her way downstairs. Maybe a walk would clear her mind. But just as she reached the living room, she froze. Because there, standing in the dim light, was Leon, waiting, watching. And he looked like he had been expecting her. A battle of wills. "Couldn't sleep?" he murmured, voice dark and smooth. "Ella si tragó con fuerza." "Neither could you, apparently." Leon smirked, stepping closer. "Tell me, sweetheart," he said, eyes glinting. "What keeps you up at night?" Fear. She knew he wanted her to say yes, wanted her to admit that he still terrified her. But the truth was far more dangerous. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how much she wanted him. So she lifted her chin and met his gaze. "No," she whispered. Leon stilled. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something raw. Something real. Before she could say another word, he was in front of her, his hands cupping her face. She gasped, her pulse pounding. "You can lie to yourself, Ella," he murmured, his lips ghosting over hers. "But you can't lie to me." And then he kissed her. A trap. She couldn't escape. The moment his lips claimed hers, everything shattered. Every wall she had built, every ounce of logic she had clung to. Because this wasn't just a kiss. It was devastation. Leon kissed like a man who had been starving for years. Like a man who had waited an eternity to taste what was already his. Ella should have pushed him away, should have fought harder. Instead, she found herself melting, gripping his shirt, pressing closer, letting him consume her. When he finally pulled away, his forehead resting against hers, his breathing ragged, she was trembling. "See?" he whispered, his voice thick with satisfaction. "You don't want to leave." Reality slammed into her. She jerked away, her heart racing. "This doesn't mean anything." Leon's smirk returned, but his eyes remained dark, unrelenting. "Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart," he said softly. "But soon, you won't even remember why you wanted to run in the first place." Ella's breath caught. Because the terrifying part? She was starting to think he might be right. Ella Carter had made up her mind. She couldn't live like this. Couldn't be a prisoner in a golden cage, trapped by a man who confused obsession with love. If Leon truly cared about her, if there was any real part of him that loved her, he would let her go. And if he didn't, then she would know for certain that what they had wasn't love. It was a nightmare. The ultimatum. Leon stood near the window of his study, his back to her, his broad shoulders tense. He had been cold all day, sensing something was coming. Now she was about to confirm his worst fear. Let me go. The words hung between them like a blade. Leon's entire body went still. Then slowly he turned. His gray eyes burned into hers, unreadable, dark. What did you just say? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Ella se tragó con fuerza, obligándose a mantener su terreno. I said, let me go. A flicker of something flashed in his gaze. Anger, disbelief. Then to her shock, he laughed. Low, dark, almost amused. You're serious, he murmured, stepping closer. Ella clenched her fists. I can't stay here, Leon. Not like this. He studied her, his smirk fading. And if I say no? Her heart clenched, but she didn't look away. Then you lose me forever. A man on the edge. Leon's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked shaken. She saw the storm brewing in his eyes, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. For so long, he had been in control, unshakable. But now, for the first time, she had power. You don't mean that, he said quietly. Ella levantó su barbilla. I do. Leon exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You think I can just let you walk away? His voice was rough, desperate. After everything? Ella's chest ached, but she forced herself to nod. If you love me, really love me, you'll let me decide for myself. Leon's breath hitched. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, to her shock, he turned away. The answer. She feared silence filled the room. Ella's heart pounded as she watched him, waiting, praying. Finally, he spoke. I can't. The words were barely a whisper, but they shattered her all the same. Her vision blurred. Leon, I can't let you go, Ella. He turned back to her, his expression raw, tormented. I won't. She took a step back. Then this isn't love, she choked out. Leon's face twisted. Don't say that. But it's the truth, isn't it? Tears burned in her eyes. Because love isn't possession, Leon. Love is a choice. And if you can't give me that... She took a deep breath. Then I was never yours to begin with. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Real, genuine fear. Because he knew, if he held on too tightly, if he didn't let her go, he would lose her forever. And for a man like Leon Blackwood, that was the one thing he couldn't survive. Leon Blackwood had spent his entire life getting what he wanted. Power, wealth, control. And Ella Carter, she was supposed to be his too. But now, standing in front of her, watching the heartbreak in her eyes, he realized he had never truly had her at all, because love wasn't something you could own. It was something freely given, and he had never given her the chance to choose him. Now he was about to lose her, and for the first time in his life, Leon didn't know what to do. The breaking point. Ella stood in the dimly lit study, her arms wrapped around herself, her entire body trembling. She had just given Leon an ultimatum: let her go, or lose her forever. And instead of answering, he had gone silent. It was terrifying, because she knew what this meant. If he didn't let her leave now, he never would. Her throat tightened. Leon, say something. He looked up at her then, his gray eyes burning. His voice was low, raw. You're asking me to do the impossible, Ella. Her heart clenched, but she held firm. No, Leon, I'm asking you to do the right thing. He let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked lost, desperate. Do you have any idea what you're asking of me? He rasped. Ella se tragó con fuerza. Yes. His jaw tightened. Then, suddenly, he laughed. A cold, bitter sound. You think I don't know the difference between obsession and love? He murmured. She froze. Leon stepped closer, his hands curling into fists. You think I don't know that I've been selfish? That I've held on too tight? His voice turned rough, thick with something she couldn't name. I know, Ella. I know I've done everything wrong. Her breath hitched. He took another step forward, his gaze piercing. But do you want to know the real truth? Ella se tragó, de repente aterrada por la respuesta. Leon's lips parted. I would rather die than lose you. The moment of truth silence. The words suffocated the air between them. Ella felt her pulse pounding in her ears. Leon! He closed his eyes, his breath shaky. I don't know how to let you go, he admitted, because I don't know how to live without you. Something inside her cracked. She had wanted this, had wanted to break him, to force him to see what he was doing. But now that he stood there completely vulnerable, completely broken, she didn't know if she could bear it. Tears burned in her eyes. Leon, But before she could finish, he suddenly stepped back. And what she saw in his expression stole her breath. Resignation, pain, and acceptance. If you want to leave, he said quietly, I won't stop you. Her heart stopped. She had expected him to fight, to cage her in his arms, to do what he had always done, control her. Instead, he was letting her go. And that realization shattered her more than anything else. Does she even want to escape? Leon walked past her, his movements slow, tense, as if every step was agony. When he reached the door, he stopped, one hand gripping the handle. If you leave, Ella? He hesitated. Then finally he turned, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't come back. A sob built in her throat. This was it. This was what she had fought for, what she had begged for. But why did it feel like her heart was being ripped apart? Why did the thought of walking away suddenly feel wrong? Ella took a shaky breath. She had a choice now. For the first time since meeting Leon Blackwood, she was free. The question was, did she even want to leave anymore?